Now that we have this example that demonstrates the mechanics of loading data with React, rendering it with D3, and having some dynamic state, this is sort of the foundation that we will build on. Next, let's load in an actual data set and make some code that just shows it in a basic way so you can sort of see what's in it. For this, I'm going to load the iris dataset. It's a classic dataset, and funnily enough, if you Google the iris dataset, my gist seems to be the first one, or maybe it's just for me, I don't know. But yeah, this is a GitHub gist, by the way. It's a nice way to host datasets or code snippets for free. This iris dataset was originally published from the UCI machine learning repository. It's from 1936. It's a classic dataset. Some folks suggested I don't use it, but I love it so much. It makes beautiful scatterplots. And once we get a scatterplot working with this, we can change out the data easily later. So it's got 150 rows. It represents flowers. Each row is an iris flower that has these different measurements for these different flower parts, the petal and the sepal, and then there's class, which is the species, Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. It's already nicely formatted as CSV, and this is the nice GitHub formatting for CSV, but if you look at the raw CSV, you can see it's just a text file, essentially. So here's what I'll do. I will fork this and call it CSV data loading and parsing. This can be a template that you can fork and then just drop your own data in here to take a look at it. Okay, so here's what I'll do is I'll just Control A to select all this text, Control C to copy it, and then go over to VizHub, and then I'll open data.csv, Control A, delete everything, and then Control V to paste it. And this is one way to get data into VizHub. And you don't have to put it in here. You could fetch it from external sources, like you could even use the raw URL of the GitHub gist. But just to keep everything standalone, which is one of the constraints, I'm going to put the data into the Viz itself. And then whenever you put data into VizHub or any platform, it's good to write up where it came from. So I'm going to go back here and look at this readme.md. And then in VizHub, I'm going to make a new file called readme.md. This is a markdown file. And then I'll just copy this into here. And then if you refresh the page, you can see that this markdown has been parsed and is displayed here in VizHub. And this is the mechanism by which you can add descriptions to your vizzes in VizHub. It follows conventions from GitHub gists and blocks.org from the days of yore. But anyway, this viz.js is inheriting old stuff from the previous example. And we don't need any concept of selected ID, so I'll just delete that piece of state. We don't need selected ID or set selected ID. We just need data. And we don't even need to map over the data. So we can just actually short circuit all of this and say, okay, this function takes a thing called data. We're not even going to parse it for now. And we just pass that into set data. And this can be further simplified, I think, by just passing in set data as the callback function to the .then here. Super duper concise. And then I'll just change around this viz.js to create a pre-element. And we don't need selected ID anymore. A pre-element represents a pre-formatted text snippet, and it usually displays as monospace. And here's what I'll do. I just want to create one of these. So I'll put an array with null as the thing that we pass into .data. And all I want to do is see this data. So instead of .attr, I'm just going to say .text. This will set the text content of the DOM node with D3. And then I'll use json.stringify data. Yeah, this should work, but it's not working. Let me see what's going on. No errors. Let me console.log data. When in doubt, console.log data. Okay, that got parsed properly. So, oh, it's because selection is an SVG. Well, okay. We're inside of an SVG, so we can use a text element instead. Let me do that. Okay, it's there. But we can hardly see it. So let's move it a little bit. Set the X position to be 10. That moves it over a little bit. Set the Y position to be 10 as well. And the font is pretty small. So we can say font size is 20 or maybe 30. Okay, now we're seeing something. And then we can set the font family to be monospace. Yeah, that's looking more code-like. But so json.stringify is a function that's built into the browser which will stringify or serialize an in-memory data structure into JSON, JavaScript object notation. And that's what we see here. But it's a little too long for my liking. To format it nicely in a pretty way, we can pass the second argument as null. I don't even know what the second argument is, but the third argument should be 2, which is the indentation. Oh, but, you know, I don't think SVG text elements deal with new lines at all. So let me put this back to a pre. Sorry about the shuffling around here. And then let me go back to app. And instead of using an SVG element, I'll just use a div element here. Yeah, there we go. And I'll just call it ref because it's not even an SVG ref anymore. We'll just call it ref like that. And then we need to select ref.current. Okay, there we go. We have escaped out of SVG temporarily, and we just put a div using useRef, and then we're selecting that. See, D3 can select any kind of DOM elements. It just so happens that SVG is the most commonly used thing. And then we've got this pre-element. And then let me just make the font size a little bigger. We can use inline styles with D3 by saying .style. So we can set the font size to be something like 32px pixels. Okay, this gives us a nice sort of view into the data. That's basically how you can load CSV data. We're not really parsing it because I want this example to be fairly generic. Your task is to fork this example and swap out the data set with your own and update the README to link back to the original source and also describe your data set. This can be our starting point or your starting point for a data visualization project. The idea is to get your data up and running inside of some program. It's not even visual yet. The idea is just to pick a data set and load it in just to get started. So good luck. To recap what's going on, we have a use state, which is initialized to be empty array. And then we use CSV from D3, which calls fetch under the hood, to load in data.csv. And it parses it into an array of objects. And then when that promise resolves, it calls setData, passing in the parsed data, causing the app to re-render. And because data is one of the dependencies on this use effect, this side effect runs. And there's a guard here that says don't even call viz if we don't have data yet. But if we do, pass that into our viz function. And in the viz function, we are console logging data. I think I'll just remove that. You could always add it back in if you want. But then we are destructuring data, and then we're creating a single pre-element. That's what this pattern does. It looks crazy, but this is the pattern that we use if we want D3 to manage a single DOM element. For example, an SVG container, a group element, or a pre-element. And then we're using inline styles to set the font size. And let me show you real quick. If you right-click and say Inspect, you can see here that the pre-element has this inline style. This is a way of using CSS, where you set the style attribute of the DOM element, like this. And then the text content of it, which we can see here, it looks weird here, but the text content of it is json.stringify, which is a built-in mechanism for serializing data into JSON. So good luck forking and modifying this to load your data